Inside a polished department store, a routine shopping trip spirals when a manager hurls an accusation at a young black girl. The arrogance of authority clashes with the girl's quiet dignity, setting the stage for a story where appearances hide deeper truths. The first crack in the silence forms, hinting at something much bigger waiting to be revealed. "We don't allow shoplifters like you in here. Put the bag down." The words cut across the glossy silence of the store like a slap. Customers froze, eyes flicking from the glimmering jewelry counter to the trembling girl standing near a rack of dresses. Fluorescent lights hummed above, reflecting off polished marble tiles. The Saturday bustle dimmed as if the entire store had inhaled at once. The manager, a broad man with slicked back hair and a navy vest stretched tight across his stomach, stepped forward with the self-assurance of someone who believed the room belonged to him. His badge gleamed under the light, Mark, store manager. His voice boomed, heavy with arrogance, as though the accusation were already proven. The girl, no more than 16, clutching a pale pink purse at her side, did not move. Her name was Alana. Her brown eyes widened, not in guilt but in disbelief, the kind of disbelief born from seeing the ugly face of racism emerge in a space that pretended to sell elegance. Her small hands shook slightly, yet her shoulders remained still. Around her, murmurs spread like ripples. A mother hushed her child. An older man whispered, "Here we go again." A security guard shifted near the entrance, waiting for his cue. The air thickened with judgment, curiosity, and fear. "You heard me," Mark barked, puffing out his chest. "Open the bag. Don't make this harder than it has to be. People like you always try to get away with something." His lips twisted around the last words, savoring the insult like it gave him power. Alana's throat tightened, but she didn't argue. She simply stood there, her silence louder than his shouting. Her calm was unsettling. It was the kind of calm that made onlookers lean in, wondering what truth rested behind her steady gaze. A symbolic gesture followed. Mark, impatient, snatched the purse from her grip. The crowd gasped as the strap slipped from her fingers. He yanked it open with exaggerated fury and pulled out nothing but a folded sketchbook, pencils, and a half-empty water bottle. No stolen goods, no evidence. Just the fragile proof of a teenager's innocent afternoon. The sketchbook slipped from his hand, pages fanning out across the floor like startled birds. Charcoal drawings of cityscapes, portraits, and dreamlike faces, scattered at the feet of strangers. A little girl bent to pick one up, whispering, "She's good." Before her mother tugged her away, Alana finally spoke, her voice soft but resonant. "You accused me before you even looked. That says more about you than it does about me." The sentence cut through the tension like glass shattering. For the first time, Mark faltered. His jaw tightened, eyes darting to the watching crowd. Whispers grew. Phones tilted upward, cameras discreetly recording. The world had changed. Arrogance no longer lived unchallenged in silence. Mark covered his stumble with anger. "Security, call the police, now." His words rang with desperation more than authority this time. The guard hesitated, glancing at the sketchbook pages on the ground, but duty or fear pulled his hand to his radio. Dispatch? We need assistance at the downtown branch. Possible shoplifting situation." His voice trailed, uncertain. Alana bent down slowly, gathering her scattered art. Each page she picked up seemed to reclaim a piece of her dignity, though her cheeks burned with the humiliation of being accused in public. She tucked the last page back into her sketchbook, lifted her head, and locked eyes with the manager. "Do what you think you need to," she said quietly, her voice carrying farther than his shouting had. "But you just made a mistake you can't take back." It wasn't a threat. It was a promise. The store seemed to hold its breath. Even Mark blinked, unsettled by the certainty in her words. Somewhere in the distance, the faint wail of a siren could be heard approaching, growing louder, closer, inevitable. The first twist of fate was already on its way, and no one in that store, least of all Mark, had the faintest idea who would walk through those glass doors next. The sliding glass doors hissed open, and two uniformed officers strode inside. Their heavy boots echoed against the polished marble, breaking the fragile stillness of the store. Blue and red lights pulsed faintly through the glass, casting fleeting streaks across mannequins dressed in luxury coats. Mark straightened instantly, his chest swelling with relief. "Over here!" he barked, waving them over like a commander. Summoning reinforcements. His tone shifted from defensive to triumphant, certain the law would anchor his authority. Shoppers parted nervously, creating an aisle of silence. Children clutched their mothers' hands. Phones lifted higher, lenses catching every second. No one wanted to miss the unfolding drama, injustice packaged as entertainment. The taller officer, badge gleaming under the store's fluorescent light, stepped forward with practiced detachment. "What seems to be the problem?" he asked, voice calm but cold. Mark wasted no time. "This girl," he jabbed a finger at Alana, "was caught shoplifting. Tried to hide something in her bag. I stopped her before she could leave." His words dripped with smug certainty, the lie layered with confidence. Alana stood a few feet away, clutching her sketchbook tightly against her chest. Her eyes lifted slowly to the officers, steady, unflinching. Her silence stretched long, enough to make the crowd restless. The shorter officer squinted. "Ma'am, can we check your bag?" Alana didn't resist. She stepped forward calmly, setting the purse gently on the counter as though it were a ritual. Her hand shook, but not with fear, with quiet fury. She unzipped the bag herself and held it open. Inside, the same pencils, the same water bottle, the same folded sketches. Nothing more. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. "It's just drawings," someone whispered. Another muttered. He jumped the gun. The truth was in plain sight, yet the accusation lingered like a stain no evidence could erase. Mark's face tightened. "She could have ditched the items before you arrived," he insisted quickly. "I know what I saw. People like her." The taller officer cut him off with a sharp glance. "That's enough." His voice carried authority, but the undercurrent was clear. He wasn't blind to the weight of Mark's words. Alana finally spoke, her voice soft but resonant. "You believed him without even asking me a question." She wasn't addressing the officers alone. She was speaking to the entire store, to every watching eye and recording phone. "That's how easy it is, isn't it? A word from someone who looks like him, and suddenly I'm guilty." Her words stilled the air. "Even." The fluorescent hum seemed to quiet. The shorter officer shifted uneasily, glancing at the growing crowd. Recording phones hovered like watchful eyes of justice outside the badge. He cleared his throat. "We still need to take you aside and ask a few questions. Standard procedure." Mark smirked as if victory were inevitable, but Alana didn't flinch. She closed her bag slowly, tucking the sketchbook inside with deliberate care. Then she looked at the officers, her gaze unwavering. "Do what you need to," she said evenly. "But you'll regret the way you treated me once you know who I am." The taller officer's brow furrowed. A line of curiosity cut through his detachment. Mark laughed mockingly. "Oh, please, spare us the drama. Who could you possibly be?" His words were venom dressed as humor. Alana didn't answer. She simply turned her head toward the entrance, as though she could already sense what was coming. The glass doors slid open again with a sharp hiss. This time, the air shifted instantly. The woman who entered carried presence like a storm wrapped in silk. Tall, commanding, dressed in a charcoal suit that whispered wealth and authority with every step. Her heels clicked against the marble like a gavel striking down. "Judgment." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Even the officers straightened unconsciously, recognition sparking in their eyes. Mark, oblivious to the undercurrent, frowned. "And who are you supposed to be?" The woman's gaze fell on Alana first. Something softened in her eyes, not pity, but fierce, protective love. Then she turned to Mark, her expression sharpening like a blade. "I'm her mother," she said, her voice smooth but carrying the weight of command. The room shifted. Phones rose higher. The cliffhanger hovered in the air like thunder before. A storm. Mark blinked, his smirk faltering. He had just picked a fight far beyond his reach, and though he didn't know it yet, his downfall had already begun. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. "I'm her mother." Every eye in the store locked onto the woman in the charcoal suit. Whispers erupted, weaving through the aisles like wind through leaves. Some customers leaned forward, straining to catch every word. Others clutched their shopping bags tighter. Sensing they were witnessing a moment bigger than a store dispute, Mark blinked rapidly, the smug grin draining from his face. "Her mother?" he stammered, then quickly recovered with mock confidence. "Well, that doesn't change the fact that your daughter tried to steal. We have rules here." The woman's gaze didn't waver. She stepped closer, heels clicking against marble with a measured rhythm that demanded attention. Her presence carried an unspoken command. "Stop, listen, and respect. I know the rules," she said evenly, her tone polished yet edged with steel. "In fact, I helped write better ones. Because I'm not just her mother. I'm the chief executive officer of this chain." The declaration sliced through the crowd like a blade. Gasps echoed. A woman near the jewelry counter dropped a necklace back onto its velvet cushion. The officers exchanged glances, suddenly aware that the ground beneath their feet had shifted. Mark's jaw went slack. "CEO?" he repeated, voice catching on disbelief. He scanned her suit, her commanding stance, the way even the officers stood straighter in her presence. The realization hit him, but arrogance fought desperately against reason. "If you were the CEO, why would your daughter be shopping?" She interrupted sharply. "Because she's a customer. And because no matter how much wealth, education, or power we hold, people like you still see her as less. You didn't see a customer. You saw a stereotype." Her words carried weight. They weren't shouted, but spoken with the precision of a courtroom indictment. Every syllable landed like a gavel. Alana stood behind her mother, sketchbook pressed against her chest, eyes shimmering. She wasn't hiding anymore. Her mother's presence made her feel taller, braver, as though dignity itself had arrived to shield her. The taller officer cleared his throat, his voice tentative now. "Ma'am, if we'd known." The CEO cut him off with a glance that froze him mid-sentence. "You should have known the moment you saw a child standing with nothing in her hands but art supplies. Your badge doesn't excuse blind obedience to false accusations. Your silence fuels this." The officer shifted uncomfortably, lowering. His gaze. Mark, however, clung to his crumbling authority. "Listen, I was just doing my job. We have to protect against theft. I can't be blamed for being cautious." His voice rose, the edge of desperation creeping in. "You can't fire me for being careful." The CEO stepped closer, so close that Mark had to tilt his head slightly to meet her eyes. Her voice dropped low, cold, deliberate. "Careful?" she repeated. Careful would have been asking my daughter a question. Careful would have been checking facts before ripping a child's bag from her hands. What you did was reckless. What you did was racist. And yes, I can fire you." The crowd gasped again, some people clapping softly, others murmuring, "Wow," under their breath. Phones recorded every second, capturing the moment arrogance met accountability. Alana's fingers tightened on her sketchbook. She remembered the sting of humiliation when her drawings scattered on the floor. But now, seeing her mother stand so firmly, she felt the balance shift. For the first time that day, she wasn't just defending herself. She was witnessing justice take root. Mark's face flushed crimson. He sputtered, searching for words that could rebuild the authority slipping through his grasp. "This is outrageous. You're making a spectacle out of nothing." She looked suspicious. "That's all." The CEO's eyes narrowed. Suspicion built. "On bias is not protection. It's prejudice dressed as policy. And I will not allow my company's name to carry that stain." For a moment, silence reigned. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade under the weight of her words. Finally, the CEO turned, addressing the officers. "You are dismissed. There is no crime here except the one that's been committed against my daughters. Dignity." The taller officer nodded stiffly, signaling to his partner. They stepped back, shame shadowing their once authoritative stance. The sirens outside cut off, leaving only the steady beat of tension inside the store. Alana exhaled slowly, the first real breath she'd taken since the ordeal began. She glanced at her mother, who gave her the faintest nod, not just of reassurance, but of solidarity. The battle wasn't over. Mark's arrogance wouldn't collapse in one blow. But the cracks had spread, and the walls of his authority were beginning to crumble. And for the first time, the store no longer looked like his kingdom. Mark's cheeks burned as though the spotlight had been fixed directly on him. He straightened his vest, his fingers fumbling with the buttons as he forced a shaky smile. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced, raising his hands to the crowd, "this is all a misunderstanding. I was only doing my job, protecting this store from theft. Surely, you can all see that." The attempt at reclaiming control fell flat. The crowd did not nod in agreement. Instead, they exchanged skeptical glances. Some muttered quietly, while others kept their cameras trained on him. The energy had shifted, and Mark's words only highlighted his desperation. The CEO's expression remained steady, her eyes locked on him like a hawk circling prey. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her calmness carried more weight than his shouting ever could. "Your job," she said evenly, "is to serve every customer with respect. To ensure they feel safe and valued when they walk through these doors. My daughter walked in here with nothing but a purse and a sketchbook, yet you treated her like a criminal before she even reached the register. Tell me, Mr. Manager, where in the training manual does it say to humiliate a child in front of strangers?" Mark's smile faltered. It's about being vigilant. You know how it is. We can't take chances. Theft happens every day in places like this." "Places like this?" the CEO repeated, her voice cutting sharp as glass. "Or people like her." Gasps rippled through the onlookers. Mark's throat bobbed as he swallowed hard. His eyes darted to the employees behind the counter, silently begging for support. But their faces betrayed discomfort. Some looked away, others fiddled nervously with jewelry cases and folded shirts. None dared come to his defense. Alana shifted closer to her mother. She could feel her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, but instead of fear, it throbbed with something new, courage. The humiliation of minutes ago was still raw, but her mother's words made her see the bigger picture. This wasn't just about her. It was about every child, every person who had been silenced under the weight of suspicion and arrogance. Mark puffed his chest again, clinging to denial. "You're twisting this. I saw her acting suspicious. She was lingering near the racks, glancing around. What was I supposed to think?" Alana spoke before her mother could. Her voice trembled at first, but the room stilled to hear her. "I was sketching," she said. She held up her sketchbook, flipping it open to reveal a half-finished drawing of the very store they stood in, the glass doors captured in soft pencil lines. "I was drawing the entrance, the light coming through the windows. That's why I looked up. That's why I glanced around. Not because I was stealing, but because I was creating." The crowd leaned in. A murmur of admiration spread, softer. "This time, she's talented. Look at that detail." Someone whispered, and he thought she was stealing. Mark's mouth opened, but no words came out. The sketch was proof stronger than anything he could argue against. CEO laid a hand gently on Alana's shoulder. "She turned this store into art, and you turned her into a suspect. Do you see the difference?" Mark stammered. I didn't mean, but you did," the CEO cut in, her eyes narrowing. "Your actions carried meaning, whether you intended them or not. And the meaning was clear. You judged her not by her actions, but by the color of her skin." Silence spread heavy across the store. Even the security guard, who had been standing rigid by the entrance, lowered his eyes. Mark's voice rose again, frantic now. "You can't hold me responsible for how things look. I was doing what any good manager would do. Protecting the company. Protecting profits." The CEO tilted her head, her gaze piercing. "And in your quest to protect profits, you risk destroying something far more valuable, this company's integrity. Do you really think customers will trust a brand that humiliates a teenager for shopping while black?" The crowd murmured in agreement, phones tilted, capturing Mark's reddening face. Every second was being broadcast to an audience far beyond. The marble walls of the store. Alana looked around, her voice finding new strength. "You thought I was invisible, that no one would hear me, but they're all hearing me now. They're all seeing what you did." The room pulsed with tension. For the first time, Mark felt the ground slipping from under him. His authority, once absolute in this store, was now cracking beneath the weight of truth, and the cracks would only spread wider. The silence in the store was no longer neutral. It was heavy, complicit, suffocating. Employees lined up, behind counters like mannequins, their uniforms neat but their eyes darting nervously. The fluorescent lights reflected on their polished name tags, each one shining with unspoken guilt. The CEO turned her attention slowly toward them. Her gaze swept over the cashiers, the floor assistants, the jewelry clerk clutching a display tray. Her voice was steady, but her words were weighted with gravity. "You all watched," she said. "You saw him rip my daughter's bag from her hands. You saw her humiliation. You saw the truth when her art scattered across the floor, and not one of you spoke." The employees shifted, their shoulders tensing as though invisible strings had been pulled. One cashier bit her lip. Another young man behind the register glanced at his shoes, his knuckles white against the counter. Mark jumped in quickly, his tone sharp. "Don't listen to her. This is between me and her daughter. Stay out of it. You all know I run this store. I'm the one who protects your jobs." The CEO's lips curved into something that wasn't a smile. Protects their jobs? Or threatens them into silence? Her question lingered like smoke. Employees exchanged wary looks, the fear in their eyes battling against a growing current of resentment. They knew the truth. They had lived under Mark's heavy hand long before this day. But fear kept their tongues tied. Alana stepped forward, her small voice filling the gap her mother had left. "When you stayed silent, it told him he was right. It told me I didn't matter. Do you know how that feels? To be 16 and treated like a thief in front of strangers while people who could have defended me looked away?" Her words pierced deeper than anger could. The quiet tremor in her voice carried the sting of honesty, and it settled in the hearts of those listening. A middle-aged woman at the perfume counter swallowed hard. Her hands, once busy arranging bottles, trembled slightly. I knew it didn't look right," she whispered, more to herself than anyone. But the sound carried, and heads turned toward her. Mark snapped instantly. "Keep quiet, Linda. Don't. You dare." But Linda raised her chin, her voice growing stronger. "No, Mark, she's right. We all saw what you did. And we stayed quiet because we were afraid of you. But I'm tired of being afraid." Gasps rippled. The first crack of defiance had split the silence. Another employee, the young man at the register, stepped forward nervously. I thought maybe she was just sketching. I saw the notebook earlier, but I didn't say anything. I didn't want to get in trouble with you." His voice faltered, shame flickering across his face. "But I should have said something. I should have spoken up." The CEO nodded slightly, not in approval but in recognition. "It takes courage to break silence. But remember this, every second you stayed silent, you gave his arrogance power. Change begins when you decide silence is no longer an option." The employees looked at one another, their faces shifting from guilt to something else, determination. The fear that Mark had relied on was beginning to fracture. Mark's face flushed red. He slammed his palm against the counter. "This is ridiculous. You're all betraying me after everything I've done to keep this place running?" His voice cracked with desperation. "Do you want to lose your jobs? Do you want this store to close?" Linda shook her head slowly. "No, Mark, we don't want to lose our jobs. But we don't want to lose our dignity either." The words struck like lightning. Applause rippled faintly from the back of the crowd, not from employees, but from customers who had been watching in silence as well. Someone called out, "She's right," and another voice added, "We saw everything." Mark spun, his authority crumbling as the ground shifted beneath him. What had once been a room of obedient silence was now becoming a chorus of defiance. Alana watched, her chest rising. With a deep breath, for the first time since the ordeal began, she saw others standing beside her. It wasn't just her fight anymore. Her humiliation had cracked something larger, the wall of silence that had shielded Mark for too long. Her mother's voice cut through the noise one last time, sharp and clear. "This is what happens when arrogance collides with truth. Silence. Can't save you anymore, Mark. Not today." And for the first time, Mark's eyes betrayed something he had tried desperately to hide. Fear. What began as whispers now swelled into something heavier, a rising wave of voices no longer afraid to be heard. The store, once tense and silent, had become a courtroom where every shopper, every bystander carried the weight of a witness. He grabbed her bag. Someone shouted from the back, "I saw it. She didn't do anything. Another voice chimed in, sharper. I got the whole thing on video. A man raised his phone high, screen glowing with the frozen image of Mark yanking the purse away from Alana. Murmurs rippled, fueled by evidence no denial could erase. Mark's face tightened, his veneer of control shattering piece by piece. You're all misinterpreting what happened, he stammered. This is mob mentality. She looked guilty. I was doing my duty. But the crowd wasn't buying it anymore. A woman near the jewelry case shook her head. Your duty is to protect customers, not humiliate them. I shop here every week, and after today, I don't know if I ever will again. Her words hit harder than any accusation. They weren't just about morality now. They were about money, loyalty, the lifeblood of any business. Mark's authority had built walls, but the walls were crumbling under the footsteps of the very people he was supposed to serve. The CEO didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She stepped forward slowly, her heels clicking like a metronome of inevitability. Listen carefully, Mark, she said, her tone slicing through the noise. These customers are not a mob. They are your jury. And their verdict is already clear. Mark laughed, but it was hollow, jagged, desperate. You think a few complaints will change anything? I've worked here for years. I keep theft down. I keep the numbers in line. You wouldn't dare fire me over this. Her eyes didn't flinch. You think this is about numbers, but you're too blind to see it's about people. Every company rises and falls on trust, and you've destroyed it right here in front of everyone. The crowd murmured in agreement, voices overlapping. She's right. We all saw. No excuses. Alana hugged her sketchbook to her chest, her fingers pressed against the worn cover. She had never felt so small and so powerful at the same time. Her humiliation was still raw, but it had ignited something larger than herself. Strangers were speaking up. Silence had cracked, and truth was spilling out. A young man in a hoodie stepped forward from the back. His voice shook, but his words rang clear. This happens all the time. People like me get followed, questioned, accused for nothing. And nobody believes us because it's always our word against theirs. But today, he raised his phone. Today, we've got proof. Gasps echoed. Cameras tilted higher. Catching Mark's paling face, the CEO's gaze hardened. You see, Mark? Your arrogance wasn't just an isolated act. It's part of a system, one that survives only because people stay silent. But not today. Today, everyone here has seen what you are. Mark's fists clenched at his sides. Sweat gleamed on his forehead under the harsh lights. He looked at the employees, searching for loyalty, but found only downcast eyes. He looked at the officers, but they remained stone-faced, unwilling to intervene. Finally, he turned back to the crowd, his voice cracking. You don't understand what it's like to run this store, he pleaded. Every day I deal with theft, excuses, lies. I can't let my guard down. I can't, Alana's voice cut through his rambling, steady and sharp. You never let your guard down because you never put your bias down. You didn't see me, you only saw what you wanted to see. The crowd hushed, hanging on her words. A 16-year-old had just dismantled the man who once ruled this space with unchecked power. Mark opened his mouth, but nothing came out. His authority, once booming, was now a whisper against the rising storm of truth. The CEO placed a hand on Alana's shoulder, grounding her. Do you hear it, Mark? She asked softly. That sound? That's the sound of your control collapsing. And it won't stop until the last brick falls. The store buzzed louder. Customers were no longer just observers. They were participants, judges, and amplifiers. Every phone recording would leave these walls, carrying the story into the world beyond. Mark's kingdom was slipping, and he knew. Mark's jaw tightened, his eyes darting like a trapped animal searching for an escape route. His suit, once neatly pressed, now clung with the weight of sweat. He raised his hand in a desperate bid for order. Enough, he barked, voice hoarse. You're all making a spectacle of something you don't understand. I've kept this store running when nobody else could. I've stopped more thieves than any of you could imagine. I have given years of my life to this place. The echo of his declaration hung in the air, but instead of commanding respect, it sounded like a confession. His words trembled, vulnerable, exposing the fear beneath his bravado. A cashier near the registers, a young Latina woman, stepped forward cautiously. Her voice was low but clear enough to slice through the noise. "You gave years, yes, but you also gave people nightmares. You embarrassed customers in front of their children. You threatened staff when they spoke up. We stayed silent because we needed the paycheck, not because you deserved respect." The crowd shifted, eyes snapping back to Mark. He flinched as though struck. "That's not true," he snapped. "You're just bitter. You all are. None of you have the guts to do what I do." But the cashier didn't back down. "The guts to humiliate people? No, you're right, we don't." Her quiet defiance spread like a spark in dry grass. Another employee, a stock boy no older than 18, lifted his chin. "I've seen him stop people who didn't do anything. I saw a mom cry when he accused her of stealing diapers. He made her dump her bag on the floor while her baby screamed in the cart." Gasps echoed, louder this time. Each testimony chipped at Mark's armor, revealing the rust beneath. The CEO didn't interrupt. She let the voices build, each one another. Nail in the coffin. Her silence was its own weapon, sharpening the humiliation he had once wielded against others. Mark turned toward the officers, his last allies. "You see what's happening here? They're ganging up on me because I enforce the rules. Back me up. Tell them you've seen it too. Tell them I was right to call you." But the officers exchanged glances, their faces unreadable. One finally spoke, his tone careful, almost wary. "We respond to calls, sir. But what we walked into today, it doesn't look good. The girl wasn't resisting. She wasn't causing harm." He paused, then added, "Our job isn't to defend your mistakes." The words landed like a stone dropping into water, rippling outward. Mark's throat bobbed. As he swallowed hard. "So that's it? Everyone turns on me now? After everything I've done for this place? After everything I've prevented?" His voice cracked, desperation unraveling into raw panic. From the back, an older customer, a man with silver hair and a weathered jacket, stepped forward. His voice was steady, seasoned by years. "Son, the problem isn't what you've prevented. The problem is what you've caused. Fear, shame, distrust. That's not leadership, that's tyranny." Mark staggered as if the words themselves had pushed him backward. For the first time, he looked small, not the towering figure who had called the cops, but a man stripped of his authority in front of those he once commanded. Alana clutched her sketchbook tighter, watching every detail. She had been the target, but now she was also the witness. She could see the unraveling not just in Mark's words, but in his very stance, his shoulders hunched, his feet unsure. The CEO finally moved, her presence cutting through the thick tension. She stood beside her daughter, calm and unshaken. "Mark," she said softly, "do you know what the worst part is?" He blinked, confusion and fear mixing. "What? You still think this is about you versus us? About power you can cling to, numbers you can manipulate? But it's simpler than that. It's about a child who came in here to shop, and you treated her like a criminal. That's the crack in your armor, and no amount of excuses can mend it." Mark's lips parted, but no words came. The silence that followed was heavier than any insult, suffocating in its finality. Around him, employees, customers, even officers stood united in quiet judgment. His empire, built on intimidation, was collapsing not with a dramatic explosion, but with steady, undeniable erosion. The CEO let the silence linger. Knowing sometimes the absence of sound was louder than any verdict, Mark's shoulders sagged. For the first time, he looked like he understood he was losing. But his fight wasn't over. Not yet. The fluorescent lights above buzzed faintly, their hum almost louder than Mark's shallow breathing. He stood in the middle of the store, surrounded by eyes that once glanced past him, but now bore into his soul. His empire had shrunk to this. Trembling hands, a sweat-soaked collar, and a room waiting for him to fail. "Don't you see what's happening?" He roared suddenly, his voice cracking like glass under pressure. He pointed at Alana, his finger shaking. "She's the one causing this chaos. If she had just cooperated, none of this would have spiraled out of control." The crowd recoiled. Gasps cut through the air like the sound of glass shattering on tile. His words, instead of regaining control, ignited disgust. A mother with 2 young children pulled them closer, her face twisted with anger. "She's a child," she said fiercely. "And you terrorized her. You don't get to blame her for your cruelty." Mark's mouth opened, but the words faltered. He turned toward the employees, his last grasp at loyalty. "You all know me. You know how I keep order. You've seen what happens when people get away with theft. Tell them I'm right." But no one spoke. The silence was louder than any denial. Their eyes told the story, not of loyalty, but of years spent enduring his tyranny. Finally, the cashier who had spoken earlier whispered, "We're done covering for you." It was a blade through his chest. The CEO stepped forward, her voice calm, but carrying an authority that dwarfed his rage. "Do you hear yourself, Mark? You've turned a store into a battlefield. You've turned a child into your scapegoat. That's not leadership, it's desperation." Her words struck with precision, stripping away the last of his pretense. But Mark wasn't ready to accept defeat. His face flushed red and his fists clenched until his knuckles blanched. "You think you can walk in here and judge me?" He spat. "You're nothing but a corporate suit. You don't know what it's like to stand on the floor, to see the lies, the scams, the games people play. I protect this place. Without me, it falls apart." The CEO didn't flinch. She let him hurl his bitterness into the void, knowing every word only deepened the pit he was digging. Alana's voice broke through softly, almost fragile but clear enough to silence the room. "You didn't protect me." Mark froze. His anger stalled in his throat, choking him. His eyes darted to her, but her steady gaze pinned him in place. "You didn't see me," she continued, holding her sketchbook like a shield. "You only saw a story you already believed. You looked at me and decided I was trouble. You didn't even give me a chance." The room was silent except for the pounding rhythm of her words. Alana had not raised her voice, but the raw truth in her tone rang louder than any shout. Mark's chest heaved, but no retort came. The accusations from adults hadn't shaken him like this, but a child's quiet truth cracked through the fortress of his denial. The CEO placed a hand on her daughter's shoulder, pride shimmering in her eyes. "That's what you'll never understand, Mark. Strength doesn't come from intimidation. It comes from dignity, from knowing who you are, even when others try to strip it away." The crowd murmured in agreement, their voices a chorus of quiet justice. Mark staggered backward, his eyes wide as though the walls themselves were closing in. His authority had vanished, replaced with the cold realization that the room no longer feared him. Still, his pride clawed for air. "You'll regret this," he hissed at the CEO. "You'll regret humiliating me in front of everyone. I built this place. You can't erase me." The CEO's lips curved into the faintest, most unshakable smile. "Watch me." The words landed like a final gavel strike. Mark's shoulders slumped. For the first time, he looked less like a manager and more like a man undone by his own arrogance. The silence that followed was not just judgment. It was the sound of an era ending. Alana exhaled slowly, her grip loosening on her sketchbook. For the first time since the ordeal began, she felt the weight shift off her shoulders. She had spoken, and the truth had landed. The store had changed. The air was different. Mark's reign of fear was over, though he hadn't yet accepted the full cost of what was coming. Mark's breath came in ragged bursts, each inhale sharp, each exhale louder than the silence pressing in on him. The crowd was no longer restless, it was resolute, the kind of stillness that signals a verdict before it's even spoken. "I've given my life to this place," Mark rasped, clinging to the same refrain like a drowning man clutching driftwood. Years of sacrifice. Years of catching people who thought they could get away with cheating the system. The CEO tilted her head slightly, her gaze piercing through him. "You caught shadows, Mark, and in your chase, you trampled people. Customers, employees, children." She stepped forward, her voice cold as steel. "This store is not your empire. It's a business, and businesses die when arrogance replaces humanity." The crowd murmured, voices rising like a tide. Someone near the front called out, "We're done with him." Another voice echoed, "Fire him." Mark's skin flushed red. He slammed his palm against the counter, rattling the display cases. You can't fire me in front of all these people. This isn't how things are done. The CEO's eyes didn't waver. Correction. This is exactly how things are done when the truth demands to be witnessed. A customer lifted his phone higher, broadcasting the moment live. The comments and reactions lit the screen in a rapid cascade. Mark caught a glimpse of himself reflected in the glass, wild-eyed, cornered, no longer the commanding figure he had once imagined. This isn't fair, he muttered, voice fraying. You don't understand what it's like to live every day expecting people to lie, to steal. It changes you, makes you hard. An elderly woman near the registers spoke up, her voice trembling, with age but firm in conviction. Being hard is no excuse for being cruel. I've shopped here for 10 years, and I've never once seen you treat people with kindness. You look at everyone like they're suspects. That's not security. That's prejudice. The words landed heavier than any shout. Mark's posture faltered. He was bleeding credibility with every passing second, his armor stripped by the truth of those he had once dismissed. The CEO glanced at her daughter, then back at Mark. You wanted to make an example of her, she said softly. But today, the example will be you. Mark blinked, stunned. His voice cracked. You can't do this. Not here. Not in front of them. Her answer was sharp, final. Exactly here. Exactly in front of them. Because they need to see that power without. Accountability ends today. The officers shifted uneasily, their presence now irrelevant. The store employees stood taller, no longer cowering under his shadow. Even the customers straightened, united in the gravity of the moment. The CEO drew a breath, her words slicing through the air. Mark, effective immediately, you are terminated. From this company. Your position, your authority, your keys, all gone. The crowd erupted, not in chaos, but in applause. Relief surged like a collective exhale, years of tension released in one resounding wave. Mark staggered, his face blanching. You can't. His voice broke, the rest swallowed by the noise around him. His hands trembled as he reached for words that no longer mattered. The cashier who had spoken earlier stepped forward, her chin lifted. We've waited a long time for this. Mark's eyes darted wildly, searching for an ally, but found none. Even the officers looked away, unwilling to meet his gaze. He turned to Alana, his voice bitter, his words jagged. You think you've won? You think speaking up makes you strong? You're just a kid. Alana hugged her sketchbook to her chest. She didn't flinch. I didn't have to be strong, she said quietly. You made yourself weak. The room went silent, her words cutting deeper than any punishment. Mark's lips trembled, his chest heaving. For the first time, he looked less like a villain and more like a man stripped of the illusion he'd lived in. Powerless. Exposed. The CEO's voice broke the silence one final time. Security will escort you out. 2 uniformed guards stepped forward. Mark resisted at first, pulling his arm free, but their grip was firm. The image of him being led away, his tie crooked, his face pale, his pride shattered, was seared. Into every eye in the store. The crowd didn't cheer. They didn't jeer. They simply watched, united in quiet, unshakable judgment. As he was dragged toward the exit, Mark's voice cracked into a final plea. You'll regret this. You'll need me when it all falls apart. But his words dissolved into the air, meaningless against the tide that had already turned. The doors shut behind him with a heavy thud, the sound of an era ending. Alana exhaled, tears burning in her eyes. She wasn't crying from fear anymore, but from relief. She had been humiliated, accused, diminished. And yet, she stood taller now, her truth unshaken. The CEO wrapped an arm around her shoulders, her voice tender. It's over. But Alana shook her head softly, her gaze sweeping across the room, at the customers still recording, the employees still whispering, the officers still processing what they had seen. No, she said quietly. It's just beginning. And everyone felt the weight of her words. This moment would not stay locked inside these walls. It would travel, ripple, and remind anyone who saw it that silence was no longer an option. The heavy thud of the doors, closing behind Mark echoed like a final gavel strike. For a moment, the store hung in silence, the kind of silence that doesn't feel empty, but full, weighted with history, judgment, and release. The hum of the lights returned, the air conditioning rumbled faintly, but no one moved. Everyone was still caught in the gravity of what they had witnessed. Alana's small hands tightened around her sketchbook. Her reflection stared back at her. From the glossy floor, not the scared girl who had walked in earlier, but someone changed, someone sharper. She drew in a breath, steady, letting her chest rise with the strength she hadn't known she carried. The CEO, her mother, looked down at her and then back at the crowd. Her heels clicked against the tile as she stepped forward, every sound commanding attention. When she finally spoke, her voice was low, but it reached every corner of the room. What happened here today, she said, wasn't just about one man's mistake. It was about the silence that let him think he could act this way for so long. Silence from colleagues, silence from witnesses, silence from the system. That silence ends here. Heads nodded. Some lowered their eyes, not out of shame, but out of acknowledgement, the recognition of complicity, of the ways people let injustice pass to avoid conflict. The CEO turned toward the employees, her gaze sharp but not cruel. You stayed quiet because you feared for your jobs. I understand that, but silence feeds arrogance. Silence allows cruelty to grow. Today, you all saw what happens when one voice speaks, others find the courage to follow. That's how change begins. The cashier who had spoken earlier looked down at her hands, then raised her chin with renewed resolve. She mouthed, "Thank you." The CEO shifted her focus to the officers still lingering, unsure of their place in this drama now that the storm had passed. "And you," she said firmly, "you answered the call, but you almost acted on a lie. That should never happen. Authority doesn't make you right. Truth does. Remember that the next time you're asked to choose between blind loyalty and justice." The taller officer gave a short nod, his jaw tight. The words had cut, but they were true. Then she looked back at the customers, the crowd who had transformed from passive shoppers into witnesses of history. "Take this with you," she said. "Tell it, share it. Let it remind you that dignity matters more than power, that accountability matters more than appearances. Because this wasn't about a store. It was about all of us." The murmurs grew. Louder, agreement, reflection, the kind of restless energy that comes when people realize they've been part of something larger than themselves. Alana shifted closer to her mother. "Mom," she whispered, her voice small but steady, "can we go now?" Her mother crouched slightly so their eyes met. "In a moment, sweetheart. There's one last thing to do." She rose and turned back to the employees. "This store will not be defined by Mark anymore. Starting today, it will be restructured. Training will be mandatory, not just for theft prevention, but for respect, for equality, for human dignity. And every single one of you will be held accountable. If that feels unfair, remember today. Remember what silence costs." The employees exchanged looks, some fearful, some relieved. But one thing was clear. The age of intimidation had ended. A voice rose from the crowd, a young man holding up his phone. "It's already live," he said. "Thousands are watching. The whole world knows now." The CEO nodded, her expression unreadable. "Good, let them watch. Let them judge. Change isn't quiet. It never was." Alana clutched her sketchbook tighter. She felt the weight of eyes still on her, but this time it wasn't suspicion. It was recognition. Respect. Some even looked at her with gratitude. As if her ordeal had freed something inside them too. Her mother straightened, her presence like a flame that refused to waver. "Justice isn't about revenge," she said, her words carrying the rhythm of finality. "It's about balance." And today, balance was restored. Slowly, people began to disperse. Some returned to their carts, though shopping felt hollow after what they had seen. Others lingered, whispering to each other, filming, ensuring the story spread. Employees began to shuffle, uncertain but lighter. As though an invisible weight had been lifted, the CEO finally guided her daughter toward the exit. Their footsteps echoed in the space that had transformed from a battlefield into a courtroom, and now into something else, a place of rebirth. At the door, Alana paused. She turned back once more, looking at the aisles where it all began, the shelves that had witnessed her humiliation and her courage. She whispered, almost to herself, "I'll never forget this." Her mother heard. She squeezed Alana's shoulder gently. "And you're not supposed to." Outside, the air was cooler, the world brighter than it had seemed when they walked in. The sun stretched across the parking lot, and the sky held no shadows heavy enough to dim what had been done. For a long moment, they stood together, silent. The silence was different now. Not oppressive, not heavy, but peaceful. Finally, Alana opened her sketchbook. On the page was a half-finished drawing she had started before everything unraveled, a simple sketch of a tree. She picked up her pencil, her hand steady, and drew roots that dug deep, lines that refused to be erased. Her mother watched, her eyes soft. "What are you drawing?" Alana smiled faintly, not looking up. "Something that lasts." The CEO nodded, her heart swelling with pride. "Exactly." Behind them, the doors of the store swung open as others stepped out. Customers, employees, strangers bound together by what they had witnessed. The story would ripple outward, reaching ears that had never set foot inside. Some would dismiss it. Others would recognize themselves in it, but none would forget it. And Mark? Somewhere beyond those walls, he would wrestle with the ruins of his arrogance. His name, once a symbol of authority, was now a warning. His silence, once enforced, was now his prison. The world doesn't always deliver justice in courtrooms. Sometimes it delivers it in grocery aisles under humming lights, with the eyes of strangers as jury. Alana closed her sketchbook, tucking it under her arm. Her mother took her hand. Together they walked forward, into sunlight, into freedom, into the next chapter of their lives. The story was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to everyone who had seen, everyone who would hear, everyone who would remember. And so the store stood behind them, not as a place of shame, but as a monument to what happens when silence breaks and truth speaks. Justice had been served. Not with a bang, but with the unshakable power of dignity.